Thank you very, very much, everybody, for joining us for this morning's Boost, Bambuddha Boost. Tips, daily advice and inspiration to help you have a really good start to the day. We're really, really lucky today to have Oscar, who's agreed to give us a little bit of his time today and teach us about deep listening. And what is listening? What kind of listener are you? He's an author, he's an inspirational character. I've just had the best half an hour of my life with him for the past half hour while we've been setting up. So please say hello, jump in, put any questions in, and I'm going to hand you straight over to Oscar today for a brilliant, brilliant 15 minutes.
G'day Anna, thank you and welcome everybody. A lot of us don't think about what the cost of not listening is when it comes to the work we do with organisations, with our teams, even at home. So today we want to spend a little bit of time understanding what's the cost of not listening. For most of us, it's something we don't consider. When I talk to organisations in Australia and all around the world, most people don't think that there's a cost in not listening. So let's go to December the 30th, 2019. Dr. Lai is working as an ophthalmologist in a Wuhan hospital, and he's just sent a WeChat message to 6 of his doctor friends saying he's very concerned about a virus that's appearing in the patients he's dealing with, and it's spreading very quickly. Now, he sent that message out to his 6 friends to stay safe. What happened next would change history. What happened next is 3 days later, the Chinese government discovered this message, and the Chinese government sent a couple of medical experts to talk to Dr. Lai, and they told him that what he said was in fact not true. He needed to recount what he said, and that there were no viruses of any significant proportion. 3 weeks were lost in the fight for COVID-19 as a result of the Chinese government not listening to Dr. Lai. And then on February 22nd, about 90 days later, despite a massive fight for his own life, Dr. Lai passed away in the work he'd done in treating other patients. So the cost of not listening is something we are all feeling today. We have lost 3 weeks in the fight against COVID-19 because people weren't listening to doctors. In our workplaces, at home, in our relationships with our friends, sometimes we ignore perspectives that aren't the same as our own. And there's a big cost in doing that, and most of us don't think about the cost of not listening. We all want to understand why people don't listen to us, yet the biggest gift we can give other people is to listen to them. Winding the clock back to August 2005, Jackson Hole, Wyoming, Dr. Rajan, an Indian vegetarian, he loves to read Tolkien. Tolkien wrote the Lord of the Rings trilogy as an example. And he was speaking at a meeting of central bankers. All around the world, the central bankers had come to this very famous fly fishing spot in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, right in the middle of the United States. And he presented a paper just after the morning tea break that said the global financial system's plumbing was backed up like a sewage system and it was about to explode. He was laughed at by all the central bankers in the room. They castigated him and said all his hypotheses were completely false. And yet, yes, less than 3 years later, Dr. Rajan's prophecy about an exploding sewage pipe that is the global financial system came to be. And again, because Dr. Rajan's opinion wasn't the common opinion of the peer group, he didn't come from the same professional background as all the other central bankers in that room. He was completely ignored. And the consequences were millions of jobs globally, billions of dollars in savings completely lost. And we're still trying to figure out if we've recovered from the global financial crisis nearly 15 years later. May 2012, about 20 miles off the Louisiana coast in the United States is an oil rig run by BP called the Deepwater Horizon. And engineers are being asked to increase production and make the pipes take oil out of the seabed much faster than is safe. Unfortunately, because the management weren't listening to the engineers saying it wasn't safe, those pipes exploded. There was a huge fire. 11 people lost their lives. And for the next 11 years, BP was to pay out $54 billion in compensation to fishermen, to tourism organisations, and to the employees who lost their lives, and to their families. All of us don't work in work environments that have multi-billion-dollar consequences for not listening. Yet when we think about projects that we work on, the projects that are late, the projects that don't deliver what we expected them to, or projects that deliver poor quality results, in most cases you can track the failure of those projects to a lack of listening. Equally, when great employees leave our organisations, they often leave organisations not because the organisation itself isn't sustaining what they need. They will say consistently they left because their managers weren't listening to them. Managers didn't turn up to the conversation, managers didn't reply to emails. And equally, customers that choose not to select us, or customers, even worse, who select us and then leave, often will cite a lack of listening from an organisation as the number one reason why they left. So all around us, the consequences of not listening are quite significant. And for most of us, what we want to understand is that has a consequence at home as well as work. I remember Mick calling me from this, he was calling me on a Monday morning, 8:15, and I was driving towards the city, and I remember the call, and I still remember 8:15 on that clock. He said, "Oscar, you nearly cost me my marriage last Friday." I said, "Mick, tell me more." He said, "My wife had put the kids to bed at about 8 o'clock at night. She'd cleared the dinner table, and she said those words every man hates to hear. Mick, we need to talk." And what she said next completely changed Mick's perspective. And Mick said, "About what?" And she said, "Just be honest with me. I know you're having an affair. Just tell me who it is and we can move on." And in that moment, Mick was completely freaked out, but took 3 deep breaths and looked at his wife and said, "How did you form this opinion?" And she said, for the last 90 days, you've done nothing but pay me lots of attention. So I know you're trying to distract me. I know you're having an affair. Stop dancing around the point. Just tell me exactly who it is and we can move on and figure out what to do with it. And in that moment, Mick said, "Look, it's not what you think it is. I've been working with a man who's been teaching me how to listen." And with that, his wife burst into tears and said to Mick in that moment, "I've never felt sexier than I have in the last 90 days, in the last 12 years of our marriage, because you've listened to me and paid attention. I'm so glad that you're not having an affair." For a lot of us, whether it's at home or at work, the cost of not listening can have huge consequences. So today I wanted to just spend a small bit of time to explain the neuroscience of listening and 3 practical tips for each of us that we can apply immediately we get off this webinar. So the neuroscience of listening, if you only remember this simple thing, I speak at 125 words a minute. You can listen at 400 words a minute. So you are programmed to be distracted. Because I'm not speaking fast enough, you are filling up the other 300 words in your head. In fact, you're drifting off. In fact, it's happening right now for some of you out there right now. You may be drifting off. And in these days where everything is being done via videos and webcams, the number of distractions that are around us are quite significant. So most of us need to understand this very simple rule. We are programmed to be distracted. I speak at 125 words a minute. You can listen nearly 3 times faster at 400 words a minute. And as a consequence, the biggest thing that gets in our way in our neurological programming when it comes to listening is distraction. So anticipate distractions. For a lot of people that you're talking to right now, they may have dogs and kids in the background, and they're going to be distracted when they're speaking. The opposite is true though. When I speak as a speaker, I speak at 125 words a minute, yet I can think at 900 words a minute. That means the likelihood the first thing out of my mouth is what I mean. There's a 1 in 9 chance, or 11%, that what I say is what I mean. So 2 things to remember about the neuroscience of listening. Number 1, 125 words a minute speak, 400 words a minute listen, and as a speaker, I can only get out about 11% of what I'm trying to say the first time I say it. So for most of us, we don't even know we have a listening problem. And it'd be great if you could read out the percentages from the poll right now about where do people rate themselves when it comes to listening. What percent were below average, average, above average, and excellent? Let us know, Anna, what were the poll results that came through?
So poor listeners, nobody thinks they're a poor listener. I probably should have ticked that one. Below average listener, 6%. Average listener, 38%. And above average listener, 56%. Excellent listener, 0%.
Excellent. So on average, we all think we're above average listeners, and this is the problem with listening. Listening is an awareness problem. So for most of us, the simple thing we need to understand are what are the barriers that get in the way of our listening. We've surveyed 1,410 people across a standard distribution curve of age group and genders, and there are multiple barriers when it comes to listening, but most listening issues happen not during the conversation but before we actually turn up to the conversation. And I'm going to give you 3 practical tips that you can use to improve your listening immediately. So those tips for each of us to think about are simply this. Oh, by the way, if you want to figure out which one of the 4 villains of listening you are, just go to listeningquiz.com and you can take a really quick 7-minute assessment, and it'll tell you which of the 4 villains of listening you are, but more importantly, it'll give you a 3-step action plan and what to do about it as well. So what are those 3 tips to make you a great listener? They're really basic. Number 1, know you will be distracted. Know that in advance. Anticipate what the distractions are and what you could do about it. So one of the distractions I anticipated for you listening to me today might be the background, and you'll notice my background is completely black, so you can focus on my lips, my eyes, my chin, and my cheeks, the best place to understand listening. But equally, in this world with lots of technology and video conferences going on, anticipate the distractions for the people you're speaking to as well. Tip number 2 is really simple. I find it hilarious that I'm on the Bambuddha group talking about 3 deep breaths. Anna, you'll have a little chuckle about this one. The deeper you breathe, the deeper you listen, the more oxygen you can get to the brain. Listening happens in the prefrontal cortex, the most modern part of the brain. So the more oxygen you can get to the brain, the better. And then tip number 3, really simple, drink water. A hydrated brain is a listening brain. Brain is 5% of body mass, yet it consumes 26% of blood sugars. So most of us go through the day dehydrated because we think coffee is our way to hydrate ourselves. But if you can drink a glass of water every half an hour, you'll improve your listening. And if you want to be a great listening athlete, these are the 3 tips that I would say to everybody is to anticipate distraction. So my phone, for example, is in flight mode right now. So I've anticipated a distraction that someone might call me as well. So they're the 3 tips for you if you want to immediately improve your listening effectiveness. I'd encourage all of you to take the quiz and discover what kind of listening villain you are when it comes to learning about the impact and the cost of not listening. Thanks for listening.
Thank you so much, Oscar. I listened very, very, very much there, and I was really focusing on the listening. Does anybody have any questions for Oscar while he's here? Any questions at all? We know we didn't get any in the Q&A. Are you all still listening? Is that what's happening right now? So how can people get involved with you? How can people get in touch with you, Oscar? Because I think this listening is a vital skill for leaders at the moment, and you know, businesses that are struggling with the current situation, there could be all sorts of things going on. And you know, what's the best way for people to engage with you at this time?
Look, the simplest way is to just visit listeningquiz.com, and that will start the journey, and you'll learn something about yourself, and then you'll have all my contact details in there as well, Anna. I think a big question I'm getting asked a lot at the moment is how to have a conversation with people who, how do you listen for fear, anxiety, and frustration in working from home? So here's 3 quick questions that you can ask people. And I'm assuming you're already in a relationship with this person, meaning they might be a staff member or they might be somebody who's a friend or something like that. A really unproductive question right now in this moment in human history is, how are you going? Please don't ask that question. That's not very useful. It's about as useful as a chocolate teapot. It's not going to have a really productive conversation. Think about these 3 questions. How much exercise are you doing at the moment? Or what does exercise mean to you at the moment? Talk to me about your eating at the moment. I asked a client this last week and she said, well, between 2 o'clock and 4 o'clock, I was speaking to her at 4 o'clock, I've eaten 3 packets of Tim Tams and 2 espressos. So that probably tells you where I'm at. And then the other question is, how are you sleeping, or what does sleep mean to you at the moment? These questions are going to get to fear, anxiety, and frustration much faster than how are you going. How are you going is going to give a robotic, superficial answer. And a lot of my clients are using that variant of those 3 questions in check-ins, and they're getting to the real issues faster, particularly for staff that are freaking out right now because there's a lot of them in that situation.
Thanks, Oscar. That's super useful. And we have got a couple of questions come through if we can steal just a couple more minutes of your time. So Tessa Irwin is asking, what's your top tips for listening to body language? And I know this is a very separate topic.
Yeah, I've actually interviewed the human lie detector, Susan Constantine. She's used by judges in the United States and law enforcement agencies. I've interviewed FBI hostage negotiators on this very topic. How do you listen for body language? So at the moment, if you look at me, you might go, oh, his arms are folded, he's very defensive. But it's really important what the listening experts say around body language is you need congruency. You need more than one signal to say that somebody's defensive. Of course, their arms are folded as an example. My arms might just be folded because I'm sitting under an air conditioning duct. So if my responses are defensive and my arms are folded, that's one way you can listen for body language. So the big thing the body language experts say consistently, and ethical use of body language, is you need to look for what they're saying, how they're saying, and how is that congruent with their body itself. So interpreting folded arms as defensiveness is false if that's the only signal you're taking in. Look at the part of their body that goes from their eyes in a triangle down to their chin. And as humans, we actually need no training in this. Instinctively and genetically, we are trained to anticipate when body language is not congruent with what the person's saying. So make sure what they say, how they're saying it, and how their body lines up is the same. If I said, for example, Tessa, well, I'm really excited to be on the Buddha BAM today. It's really exciting to be here. It's a quite a different experience. The other thing I would say is sometimes the body language we listen to isn't necessarily what the body's showing us, but what their state is. So look for shoulders back and listen for whether the voice is coming from the throat or further down in the diaphragm, way down here. That will help you out there. But if you check out the podcast episode 67 with Susan Constantine, you'll learn heaps about the body language experts and what they say there, Tessa.
Thank you so much. We've got one final question for you, from Matthew Owen. Nice to see you again today. How do I demonstrate to my clients that I'm listening? Can I do it effectively in writing, or do I have to do it verbally?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I'm delighted you noticed the distinction. So what the academic research shows consistently across cultures and across continents and across age groups and genders, people who are speakers believe that you're a good listener if you consistently verbally confirm your understanding of the conversation. So an example might be, so Anna, what you've just asked me is a question from Tessa about body language. All of a sudden you go, well, he's paying attention. When it comes to writing an email, this is another form of listening as well. So sometimes if you send an email to somebody and you don't get a response and you've taken a lot of time to put the email together, you might get frustrated and go, they're not listening to me. Sometimes one of the practices I use and I teach my clients is if somebody's sending you a long and complex email, simply note that you've received it and go back to them and said, I've received your email. I just need to take a bit of time to digest it. And that will send them a really simple signal. Oh, okay, my email was important enough for them to listen to. They just have to process it as well. So I just want to confirm there with Matthew, did that answer the intention of your question? See what I just did there? All right, we'll wait for Matthew to reply before Anna, you get a chance to wrap up.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yes, indeed it did. Thank you very much for that. I think today was a great lesson in listening for everybody, and do jump on and take part in that quiz, because I'm doing it as soon as I get off the computer, if I'm going to be honest. It's going to be quite insightful. And I think also understanding how other people communicate and listen. I certainly, if I speak, I'll say, did you get what I mean? Do you understand what I'm saying? Can you give me a verbal response? I need a verbal response. You know, so I think that's a definite example of that. But we're really lucky to have had you here today, and we will put this recording online so anyone can listen to that again. But can we give Oscar a massive round of applause today? We can hear him. Give him a round of applause. And we do have more boosts coming up. Tomorrow we're actually going to spend some time with Tony from Shine Wing Australia, who is going to do a bit of questions and answers around all of these different kinds of financial packages and bits and bobs that are going on at the moment, because they're changing at the speed of light and there's all sorts coming out at the moment. So whether you're a sole trader, whether you're an SME, whether you've got staff teams, tune in tomorrow, find out what your entitlements are, find out where to start, and ask Tony any questions. But remember to be kind to yourself today. Do some good listening to yourself and others, and you know, be kind to others as well. We'll see you tomorrow, and thank you very much for tuning in again. Take care.